In this video, I will walk you through how to use the Excel file to create the efficient frontier. You should have loaded the file from Blackboard called Portfolio VaR Updated. It should be right next to the Word document you used to find this YouTube video. When you load the Excel file, you'll see the first page that come up hopefully should be the assumptions. If not, go to the EF model page. It says assumptions. And it just gives you assumptions of return, risk, and correlation for 6 asset classes. 2 asset classes related to stocks in the United States, 2 asset classes related to stocks outside of the United States, and 2 asset classes related to fixed income or bonds. The 2 stocks categories within the U.S. are large companies and small companies. The 2 asset classes outside of the U.S. are stocks of developed market countries, large developed countries like UK, Germany, Australia, and then emerging countries such as China or India or South Korea, excuse me. And then you have two bond classifications: fixed income, which is just investment grade, high quality bonds, and then high yield, which are also known as junk bonds, below investment grade bonds. Those bonds of companies that may not repay their debt, which is why they have a high risk but also higher expected return. You do not need to worry where I got these assumptions for return from. I think they're reasonable assumptions. We may talk a little bit about those assumptions in class, but for now, just accept that those are the assumptions we're going to use. For risk, you'll notice that the risk numbers actually reference the spreadsheet in another place in the spreadsheet, and essentially what our risk assumptions are is we're just using historical standard deviations for each asset class. You can see large cap has a historical annual standard deviation of 15.5%. Small cap much higher at 20%. Developed country stocks in between large and small, emerging the highest risk. Bonds, high quality bonds, obviously the lowest risk, and high yield in between. And in correlations tells us how these asset classes move together over time, because when we combine assets together into a portfolio, these risk numbers will be impacted by how much the 2 asset classes move together or how they correlate. So large cap versus small cap, you'll notice that correlation here of 0.87. You'll also notice that I'm referencing a cell there. So essentially our correlation assumptions are simply based on history, and that's where that number is coming from. You can see large cap and small cap stocks have a fairly high correlation. The highest your correlation can be is 1.0. That's perfect positive correlation. You can see small cap and large cap have a correlation of 0.87. So they move somewhat together. When large company stocks are doing really badly, small company stocks are going to be doing really badly at the same time. Fixed income actually has a slight negative correlation to large company stocks. When the stock market's doing really well, there's a good chance interest rates are rising, which is somewhat of a headwind for bonds. In the same way, when large company stocks are doing really poorly, people will move to fixed income for protection, and they'll do well, and so that's why you have the negative correlation. So there's our assumptions. You do not have to worry about the assumptions. You just accept them as is. In your paper, you want to acknowledge that you're using Professor Sweet's assumptions, but other than that, you're just using my assumptions. The next section here, so the top section is your assumptions. The next section down is the actual model. You'll spend a lot of time in this part of the spreadsheet. You won't spend much time in the assumptions. You'll spend most of your time here. You'll notice below that in pink are all the calculations. You probably won't spend any time there. You might want to look at it just to see how I set up the spreadsheet in case you wanted to build something similar. But you'll spend almost all of your time in this blue section of the spreadsheet. The first section, starting with B15, is where you type in your assumptions for the different your assumptions for how you allocate to the different asset classes. You will actually type in numbers here the very first time when you set up your client. So however you define your client, they will have a certain allocation. You can see here I typed 60% for large cap stocks, 0 in small cap, 0 in developed, 0 in emerging, 40% in fixed income, and 0 in high yield. It's actually good with your client to set them up so that their initial allocation is not all that well diversified. That way you have something you can recommend that will be obviously better. And so there's my allocation. When you key it into your client, just make sure that it adds up to 100%. It can't be 110, it can't be 90, it must be exactly 100%. you'll see once you enter that in that this portfolio has an expected return of 6.6% and an expected risk of 9.21%. And then we have some constraints. These constraints, the first one is really not a constraint. It's target risk. This is where you'll be typing in the risks that you want to use to build an efficient frontier. You will not type anything in here when you're doing, you don't need to worry about this when you set up your initial client and where they are. You just type in here and I'll show you what you do after you do that. But once you start running the solver routine, which I'll show you here in a little bit, that is when you want to adjust these numbers. These numbers here, these constraints, you only adjust one time, and you want to come up with some numbers. And what is the max you would want to put into high yield? What is the max you would want to put in emerging market stocks? What is the max you want to put in non-US stocks, those developed plus emerging market stocks? And then you might even have a minimum. What's the minimum you want to do to non-US stocks? You might want to say, hey, I don't want more than 40% in developed and emerging market stocks, but I should have at least 10. Now these assumptions from E16 through E19, you must type in your own assumptions. You cannot use my assumptions. You need to come up with a new set of assumptions. You don't have to change them radically. You don't have to change necessarily all 4 of them, but I suggest you change them. Now you can change them such that you can add a new assumption, a new constraint. Once you see how we do solver, I think you'll see that adding a new constraint is not that difficult. Or you can change a constraint. Instead of saying the minimum to US stocks, you can say the minimum to small cap stocks or something like that if you have some preference. You've got to come up with the rationale for these. That's one of the more difficult things to do. You just got to get creative and make things up. Maybe your client just does not feel comfortable with having more than 40% outside of the US or 30% or 50% because they just are uncomfortable with the risk outside of the US. However you want to state it, those are your constraints.